We are so fortunate today. Our guest is Brigadier General Ty Seidule, former head of the History Department at West Point, now the Joshua Chamberlain Professor of History at Hamilton College, acclaimed author of books like Robert E. Lee and Me, Dispelling the Myth of the Lost Cause. His newest is Promise Delivered, with co-author Connor Williams, is on the American heroes whose names and honors are supposed to replace those on the American military bases that were named for Confederates, traitors. The book has an incredibly illustrious list of endorsements. Ken Burns, Rick Atkinson, Joe Ellis, Sidney Blumenthal, and last but not least, James Carville. Ty, we were so fortunate to have you. James has been delayed for a while, but these bases were renamed by an act of Congress. Defense Secretary Hegseth and Trump are playing games trying to undo this. Do they have the authority to do that?
Well, it turns out that they did it, whether they have the standing to do it or not. And I think it's maybe possibly awful, but lawful. So they probably do have the authority. But because they didn't just change it back to Confederates, they did surname over service. So we, as a naming commission, by an act of Congress, changed them. They were accepted, and then Hegseth and Trump changed them back to the names of the Confederates, but then did a switcheroo to name them after other people. And I think the most egregious one of those, so there was a Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia. We changed it, and then they changed it back, but they couldn't find somebody named A.P. Hill, so they named it after three people, Anderson, Pine, and Hill, to get to A.P. Hill. It's crazy to overthrow an act of Congress to be able to do this.
Well, but if it's an act of Congress, they should have to get, I would think, congressional approval to change an act of Congress. But you're saying maybe not.
Well, the problem with it is that, and just to get into, I'm not a lawyer, but to be able to sue, you've got to have standing. Standing means that you were personally aggrieved or did harm by what they did. And what they have found throughout much of what the Trump administration has done is they can either break the law or bend the law, and there's no way to go about to try to change it because no one has standing. And I think that's the case here. I think that because Congress passed the law, they accepted what we did, that as soon as this administration goes away, or maybe not, that it will change back. And I think what's really fascinating is what happened in Congress. So, we were finally going back. The government is going back into business. And the two major pieces of legislation are the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the major piece, which funds the security apparatus. It's a nearly $1 trillion piece of legislation, and that is what created the naming commission, and that's what's going through now. Well, the Senate version of that, of the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, said return the three Virginia bases to what the naming commissions had. So that's what Mary Walker, Arthur Gregg, Charity Adams, and also I'm blanking on the last one, right? Van Barfoot. So Trump changed them back. Now the Senate says you've got to put them back to Virginia. The Virginia name's back to what we said. Then the House, with Republicans, said you should take all of them back. So now the bill goes to conference, and we don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is history is never over. This fight over commemoration is never over. And that's really what we talk about in our book.
Well, it's just so awful that they would do this, so unnecessary. Let's talk about some of the heroes that you rename those bases after. You mentioned Dan Barfoot. Tell us about him.
Yeah, Van Barfoot, Choctaw Indian from Mississippi. The first time we'd ever named an installation after a Native American was joined in 1940, and then huge, big guy, 6'3", goes with the 45th Division into Italy. By the way, the 45th Division, fascinating. They're the Thunderbirds. But what's interesting about them is that before World War II, they had their patch insignia, right here, was a swastika, because that was a Native American symbol before World War II. Then they changed it to the Thunderbird. So Van Barfoot goes in to Italy as a squad leader, then platoon sergeant, and takes multiple machine gun nests, single-handedly killing numerous Germans and during this time, and then eventually becomes a lieutenant, comes back, stays in the Army, goes to Korea, becomes a eventually a colonel in the Virginia National Guard. And when we went to Virginia, they said, please name it after Van Barfoot. Here's a Virginia National Guardsman that retired to our community, stayed in our community, who we love and cherish. And we had, when we did the naming ceremony for him, the Choctaw Nation came along with the Indian nations in Virginia and did a war dance there at that new base. So
Oh,
it was
wow.
incredible ceremony and incredible American hero who received the Medal of Honor. Just one story about the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor, if you look at it, the interior part of it, when it was created and still for the Navy and the Marine Corps, actually has Lady Justice mighting the foul spirit of secession, holding three snakes. So the Medal of Honor is an anti-Confederate medal.
Wow. Fort Benning, I think it was named after Hal and Julie Moore. Is that right?
That is right. So just to know who Benning was, never served in the U.S. Army and actively tried to stoke secession starting in 10 years before the Civil War, and once said that he would rather have famine and pestilence rather than accepting the end of slavery. And then, so who we named it after, the first time we've named a base after a family. And if it had just been, Hal Moore was great. And if you've ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson, it's him, the Battle of Ia Drang, when he took on 3 regiments of North Vietnamese regulars and defeated them, and was an amazing soldier, West Point graduate, received the Distinguished Service Cross there, Silver Stars in Korea, a great soldier. But it's his wife that is the reason we named that. His wife sent her husband, her father to World War II, where he almost died, then sent her husband off to war twice in Korea and in Vietnam. And her story about what it was like to be a spouse during the war is what's incredible. So it used to be, Al, that when they went off to Vietnam, that the families at home had 30 days to vacate their quarters on post. So she had 30 days to move from this spectacular 3,500 square foot home on Fort Benning to a 1,000 square foot home off post with 5 kids. And then she noticed that there were that all the soldiers started dying. And how did she know this? Well, there was a knock on the door, and a Western Union telegraph came, and she said, "Oh my God, my husband's dead." It turned out to be the wrong the wrong address, but she realized how horrible it was to receive this knowledge from a telegram, and she went and followed the cab drivers to where they were doing to comfort these women, and then from there changed the way the Army did it, forced the Army to do the casualty notification system we do now, which is a chaplain and an officer going at this worst moment in a family's life to try to help. So she led blood drives, and they're both buried there. Was Fort Moore buried together on that fort? They retired there, and they had 5 children, 3 of whom served in the U.S. Army. So she saw her father, her husband, and her sons off to war.
Boy, what a deserving couple to name that after. Ty, I want to talk about a couple contemporary things. You stay in touch with active as well as retired military officers. What's the sense or the morale now of American flag officers after the first 10 months of the Trump administration?
Yeah, I talk mainly to those who are retired, because what I don't want to do is to have anybody say I talked to Ty about it, because I'm well known as being critical of the Secretary of Defense. And by the way, I will not call him the Secretary of War until the Defense Department is changed by an act of Congress. There's a reason why we call it the Department of Defense. The Secretary of War was just for the Army.
Right.
So, but among the retired people, general officers and flag officers I talk to, it's a sense of horror and of doom. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is how he's gone after people who have served honorably for this nation, particularly women and Black officers, and forced them to retire. The second is how he went after those who served in the JAG Corps, the Army lawyers. And we see that with what's happening in the Caribbean, because it is fundamentally breaking the laws of war that we all grow up with and know. The third is how he is politicizing the General Officer Corps and working to make sure they do that. And that is as simple as hiring his own people to be the secretary's lawyers. And then he's changed the name to the Secretary of War. He has that horrible thing of getting all the generals in one place to berate them about being fat And, Al, the most important 6 inches on the battlefield are not around the waist, they're between the ears. And our Secretary of Defense is lacking there.
Well, I was going to ask you, let me move to that because I think you have either served, you were 36 years in the Army. I think you've either served under or closely observed at least 20 secretaries of defense going back to late 1980s. And I'm sure you agreed with some more than others and disagreed with some on some things. But have you ever before, and do you now think that we have a Secretary of Defense who is unfit for the office?
You would so The short answer is since the Secretary of Defense has come in, there isn't anybody close. He has neither the temperament, the intellect, or the character to do that. And without those three, that's pretty bad. But as a historian, I would go back to the only other one that comes close was James Buchanan's Secretary of War right before the Civil War, where he sent the artillery and arms to the Confederates to, and in Grant's words, make them available when treason happened. So that's the only other one. But even then, this guy is level of the. I mean, he has no. He really reminds me of Al. There's a great article in the New Yorker that came out in 2008 about his company that he served in Iraq, and that's what he really was his major experience. And so he looks he acts like a lieutenant who looks up at the higher headquarters at these generals and say, those stupid SOBs, they don't know what they're doing. And it's really him that doesn't know what they're doing. But he was in a company called Kill Company, and the senior officers were relieved for killing so many Iraqis. And two members of that company were then jailed or were convicted of war crimes. So that was his searing experience. And if you look at his lapel, he doesn't wear the American flag. He wears the Rakistan, the regimental crest of his unit that he was with in Iraq. And frankly, I don't think he's ever gotten over that. And that's really what he's like a lieutenant that now has been given charge of the most complex organization in the world.
That's frightening. What are the consequences of what he's doing to the officer corps? What's the consequences of creating ideological and Trump loyalty litmus test in our senior
Yeah,
officials?
I think there are. Well, the first thing I would say is if you looked at what we did, at what those general officers did, I've never been so proud of the senior leaders in the military is how they acted when Hegseth and Trump talked to them, in some cases berated them because they were absolutely stoic. They absolutely said nothing. And that's exactly the right thing to do. So in that sense, I think the culture of the military is going to survive this. But in the meantime, those who are serving are under enormous stress. It's enormous stress because they're there to do what the boss says. So I went looking out to find, has there been any military officer, senior officer at the general flag level who had retired or resigned because of policy difference in the 20th or 21st century? I couldn't find anybody. It's not what we do. They do it in Department of Justice, they do it in state, but we don't do it in the military. So they're just going to do and take and execute to the very best of their ability what they're doing. But I think it shows the professionalization and the service of these people, all of whom had seen extensive combat in Iraq and Afghanistan or in services or theaters around it, of how professional they are. But it is going to really be hard because we still got 3 years and 3 months left
Oh
of this.
boy, it
I mean,
is.
it's so hard for those who are serving. It really is. And I think, I'm just talking about this on Veterans Day as someone who has served, but those who are currently serving, boy, I tell you, we should think about them on Armed Forces Day because they are really doing the most difficult work I've ever seen in uniform.
Ty, let me give you another hard one. You're at Hamilton now, but West Point always is in your heart. The long gray line courses through your veins. The Trump administration is making dramatic changes at the academy. What
Yeah.
effect is that having?
Well, I tell you, this has been so hard, and really, I've spent 20 years there to see that what they're trying to do to the military academy is terrible. I'll give you
And I would
one
say the
example.
Naval Academy also.
Naval Academy and Air Force Academy as well.
Yeah.
I would give you, the Board of Visitors is that group that is they're not really the Board of Trustees. They're sort of the political people that go there regularly to see how the academy's doing. Remember, 100% of the academy's funding comes from the federal government and the Army.
Right.
100%. So they have got to be, if there's, if there's ever anything that they get so upset with West Point, they could shut it down. And they almost did in 1861 and 1863. So first, who's on that board of visitors? Mike Flynn is
Oh
on the
my
board of
God.
visitors. Yeah, and we know, this is a person who lied and was convicted of lying, a retired three-star who has been sort of the leader of the MAGA movement, but maybe even more right-wing than the MAGA movement, and was involved in post-January or the activities after the election. Another thing is the getting right involved in what they're teaching. So they did away with the sociology major. They've canceled courses. I started something called the Black History Project to think about the way that we were teaching and the way that Black cadets and officers were there, and that's been canceled. So they're putting back up the portrait of Robert E. Lee in Confederate gray that has an enslaved servant in the background. That's back up now. So it's amazing. Who would have thought that you would have had a pro-Confederate administration? But that's what we have now.
Ty, I talked about this to you, and I also talked to someone I know, Jeff Smith, class of 1965, West Point, was the CIA general counsel. And the point he made is he said, 20 years from now, some of these young men or women are going to be sitting in the Situation Room, and they are going to be much less informed, much less broad based, much less knowledgeable than people were who did not have this kind of a crackdown at West Point.
Yeah, it hurts my heart. It really does. It hurts my heart because I know how great the people are there. They believe so much. The mission statement for West Point is so wonderful.
It
It's
is.
to educate, train, and inspire leaders of character for the nation. How much better could you get? And you can't put a shot put anywhere on West Point without seeing the words duty, honor, country. It's a magnificent organization, and it's going to survive this. It really is.
It
We're
might
going to
it,
be
it might
okay.
also say beat Navy too on that shot
It,
put, but
it, it
that's
occasionally
okay.
sa- it occasionally says beat Navy, and we're coming up on that game in less than a month. And one of the great sporting events in the country is the Army Navy game. I know you've been
Oh,
to those games. It's
I grew up
magnificent.
on those games. It sure is.
Uh,
Final question. I've asked you this before, Ty. I frankly am disappointed in some of the retired top officers, the James Mattises, the H.R. McMasters. They know how dangerous and how bad this is. And this excuse that former military officers don't speak out. David Shoup spoke out during the Vietnam War, the most decorated Marine of all time. General Ridgway, General Gavin, two of the great heroes of D-Day. I mean, it infuriates me. How can they justify their silence?
I think they do it in two ways. The first is there was a great article in the San Antonio paper. Sid Christensen wrote it, who said that there's fear. And I have talked to those who are fearful that they will be brought back on active duty under Article 88 of the UCMJ, which says you can't denigrate the president or the secretary of defense. So there's some fear there. The other part is that there is some that says, listen, I don't get involved in politics. But I don't really buy that because some of those same people have criticized they criticized the exit from Afghanistan, which it certainly should have been criticized. It was terrible. So I think that I think that there is a need for those to do that. From my perspective, I'll tell you what I think. I think that we are looking. We're going to look back in 20 years, and I tell you what I want to think. I want to say I raised my hand and said, "This is wrong. This is not the way my country, the United States of America, should act." And right now, because I'm at Hamilton College, I have academic freedom and freedom of speech, and I'm going to use it to say what the Secretary of Defense is doing is wrong, and he should change what he's doing to reflect the best of America, not the worst.
Well, thank goodness you're doing that. You're also in a chair that is named after one of the great American heroes and one of my historic idols, Joshua Chamberlain. So
Yep.
it's
Chamberlain's amazing. Just got through. My students just read an excerpt from Killer Angels, the
yeah.
great book about that. And yeah, I mean, we have so much we have a great military because we reflect a great country, and that's
Well,
what we should always remember. And we're going to get back to that. But we've had tougher times, and I realize, as a historian, I'm hopeful that we're going to get through this because this nation and our military is stronger.
Well, when we do get through it, it'll be because of people like Ty Seidule. General, I can't tell you, James is so sorry he had to miss this because of a Wi-Fi breakdown. We're not technologically very proficient, but we loved having you, and James will insist, and I will agree to have you back sometime soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Al. Take
Thank
care.
you.